Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. If your name appears right here, know that you are appreciated and the love comes back to you tenfold. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you like what you are hearing, please leave a like and leave a comment. It lets the algorithm know that you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to become part of Back to Ashes, please hit that subscribe button and make sure your bell is set to all. That way you don't miss any uploads. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this vocal melatonin entitled True Creepy Delivery Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, or maybe somewhere in the middle, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. I hope you enjoy. As a third-year university student, my diet mostly consists of cheap takeout, pizza, gyros, burgers, the kind of food that keeps me going without breaking the bank or pretending to be healthy. It didn't take long before I was on a first-name basis with the crew at the little pizza joint, just 3 blocks from my place. The guys there were genuinely decent. I first met them when my friend Sharon and I popped in to grab a pie for pizza night. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the plan because my roommate Sam, self-appointed sexuality detective, had invited herself along. I'm not against anyone's orientation. Sharon's proudly out and has complimented my backside more than once. But Sam had decided months earlier that I was secretly a lesbian in denial and made it her mission to help me come out. Movie night with her meant watching every lesbian rom-com or coming out story ever made, followed by earnest talks about authenticity that left everyone uncomfortable. Sharon wasn't excited either. Sam had a talent for turning casual hangouts into tense interrogations. She later tried to sabotage Sharon's long-term relationship by spreading rumors, hoping to swoop in as the supportive friend. Yeah, awkward. I vented to the pizza guys about Sam's latest campaign, and they came up with a solution. Come back at midnight for a horror movie screening on the projector they'd set up in the dining room after closing. I love horror films, so I was instantly in. Sharon was convinced it was a murder plot. We went anyway. Over the next few months, Friday nights became my escape. I'd head to the shop for discounted pizza and scary movies with the crew. Anything to avoid Sam, who had started monitoring my comings and goings like a reality TV tracker. Business was good, so they hired extra drivers. That's when Bill showed up. Bill was the classic burnout delivery guy, mid-40s but looked closer to 60. Perpetually stoned, always late with elaborate sob stories about how tough life was as a pizza driver. Customers despised him. He'd barge into their home to set the pizza on the table, supposedly for better tips, then stand in the doorway until he got what he considered generous cash, or weed if they were short on money. If neither was offered, he'd berate them for being stingy. One evening, I ordered delivery instead of going out. Usually, the good drivers handled my address, but that night, the rotation landed on Bill. He lingered in my doorway way too long, dropping lines about why the guys call him Big Bill. I shut the door as politely as possible and vowed he'd never darken my step again. The owners eventually had enough and gave him his walking papers. On his final shift, I stopped by the shop to chat with my friend Pete. Bill was supposedly taking the firing in stride and was out on his last delivery. While Pete and I caught up, mostly about his girlfriend's latest drama. Bill wandered back in. He tried to insert himself into the conversation, then started pushing for me to let him drive me home. I said no repeatedly. It was just a short walk. He got sulky, accused me of thinking he was creepy. He wasn't wrong, and finally stepped outside for a smoke. As he passed me on his way out, he grabbed my ass. The second he was gone, I told Pete. Pete, being Pete, cracked a joke about it being a compliment and admitted he might have done the same if he weren't such a coward. I was furious, but it was late, so I started the walk home. At the first crosswalk, Bill's battered gray car pulled up. He rolled down the window, offered another ride. I declined again, firmly. He gave a creepy wave, turned right, presumably back toward the shop, and drove off. I kept walking. At the next crosswalk, the same gray junker blasted its horn behind me and sped past. I figured it was just Bill being an asshole again. I stayed alert until I reached the gate to my backyard. The backyard is pitch black at night, so I clutched my keys between my fingers like a weapon. Nothing seemed out of place until I rounded the corner toward the front of the house. There, parked at the curb, the gray shitbox. My brain short-circuited. Instead of ducking straight into my landlord's basement entrance right beside me, I sprinted the extra 20 feet to my own front door. Adrenaline made me feel supersonic. Bill moved like a sloth in a horror movie. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, heard his car door slam, heard a whistle. I snatched the keys, jammed them in, burst inside, slammed the door, and locked it. Silent. I didn't turn on lights. I crept to the front window and peered out. Couldn't see him clearly, but the glow of a cigarette inside the car gave him away. Sam wasn't home. I called Pete. Generic Italian mob boss pizza. Pete speaking. Pete. Fuck. Bill followed me home. He's outside right now. What? He's supposed to be doing a delivery across town. It's him. Same shitty gray car. I've seen it 3 times tonight. Pete said he'd be over in 15. I moved to my bedroom, locked the heavy door, and sat in the dark trying to slow my breathing. I could hear my landlord's TV downstairs. Then the doorbell rang. The only way to reach the landlord was past the glass panel front door, right where Bill could see me. Fear turned to anger. I muttered, "Screw it," and hurried downstairs. Through the window, I saw Bill's head and shoulder. He spotted me and called out cheerfully, "Hey, Em, it's Bill from the pizza place. Pete sent me with a free pizza for you." I ignored him and bolted down the next set of stairs to bang on my landlord's door. He opened it half asleep. I blurted, "A creepy guy followed me home, won't leave. He's at the front door right now." Landlord woke up fast. He marched upstairs in full dad voice mode and told Bill through the door that no pizza had been ordered and that he had 10 seconds to leave before the police were called. Bill didn't argue. We watched him shuffle back to his car, pizza box still in hand, probably someone else's pizza order. Landlord told me to wake him immediately if anything like that happened again, then went back to bed. I kept watch from the front window, phone screen blazing so Bill could see I was ready to dial. Eventually, his car started and rolled away. I called Pete to say the landlord had dealt with it and he didn't need to come. When Bill returned to the shop later, Pete made it very clear that showing up again, anywhere near me or the place, would end badly for him. That was almost 2 years ago. No sign of Bill since. I never call the police. Some people might judge that, but it's just how I handle things, unless I'm truly out of options. Bill radiates creep energy so strongly, I doubt he'll ever get far with anyone before they clock it. And that was the end of my involuntary pizza delivery saga. When I was 20 years old, so 6 years ago, I worked as a delivery girl for a pretty popular pizzeria in my area. Initially, I worked the late morning to mid afternoon shift, but when the guy who handled the night shift got fired for losing his license due to a DUI, I was moved to nights. My boss had hired a family friend who could only work my original shift for some reason, so I got stuck with the late hours. I really didn't want the night shift. You never know if people ordering pizza late at night actually want food or have other intentions. Unfortunately, my boss was an asshole and basically told me that if I wasn't willing to work nights, I was fired. I wasn't in a position to be out of work, even temporarily, so I reluctantly agreed. The first month went by without any issues until I had to deliver to a house that was just barely within our delivery radius. I punched the address into my GPS, and it led me to a pretty suburb part of the city. I arrived around 11 p.m. The block was extremely quiet, decently lit, and lined with modern townhouses. But the delivery address was a duplex. I rang the doorbell and waited about 30 seconds. No answer. I rang it again and waited another 30 seconds. Still nothing. I stood there getting nervous, worried something was about to go down, but thankfully a man finally answered the door. He looked to be in his late 40s, tall, maybe a little over 6 feet, and very skinny. I told him his pizza had arrived, but he just stood there staring at me. I asked if he was okay, and he replied, "Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry. Got off work not too long ago and I'm zoning out a bit." Fair enough, I figured. He handed me the money. I gave him the pizza, and as I was making change, he said, "You're really beautiful. You know that?" Not thinking much of it, I thanked him for the compliment and handed him his change, said goodnight, and left. He said goodnight too. I walked back to my car and finished my deliveries for the night. A few days later, I got another order to the same address. I headed over around the same time and rang the doorbell. He answered excitedly and said, "Hey, it's you again. How are you?" I told him I was tired and couldn't wait to go home. He chuckled and said, "I know that feeling pretty well," as he pulled out his wallet. While counting his money, he asked my name. Tired and not thinking straight, I stupidly told him. As I made change, he asked if he could have my number because he'd love to hang out with someone as gorgeous as you are. Whoa, buddy. Pump the brakes. I'd literally only met him twice to deliver pizza. I had no idea who he was, and I'm pretty sure he barely knew anything about me either. Another thing worth mentioning, I looked way younger than my age. Numerous people told me I still looked about 15, and I was really hoping he didn't think he was hitting on a teenager. I stood there awkwardly for a few seconds before managing to say, Sorry, I have a boyfriend." He got upset and muttered, "Oh, okay, I see." We stood in silence for a moment before I told him to have a good night and walked back to my car. He said nothing and just stood in the doorway staring at me until I started my car and drove away. I got a seriously creepy vibe from him and mentioned it to my coworkers. They agreed it was weird, except for my boss, who overheard and claimed I was making up stories to get sympathy for having to work nights. What a fucking asshole. A week later, during another night shift, we got yet another order from the same guy. This time, things escalated badly. I arrived around 10:30 p.m. From the road, it didn't look like a single light was on in the house. I got out of my car, pizza box in hand, and walked to the front door. As I approached, the man suddenly swung open, revealing the man, this time wearing a suit. I jumped back in surprise. He laughed and said, sorry if I scared you. I saw you out the window and figured I'd just open the door so you wouldn't have to ring the bell. I was already scared. No lights on in the house. Had he been sitting in the dark the whole time? And if so, why? I nervously laughed and said it was okay. He asked if I liked his suit. I said yes. Then he asked, would you like to go on a date with me tonight? What the fuck? I told him again that I had a boyfriend. He chuckled, stepped closer and said, honey, there's no way a girl your age is in a serious relationship. If you go on a date with me, I'll show you how a real man treats a girl. He grabbed the pizza box from my hands, tossed it aside, and seized my arms. Hard. I was terrified, trying not to cry from the overwhelming fear. I pleaded, dude, please, I just want to go home. I don't want to go on a date tonight. He just stared at me with the most sinister look I've ever seen and said, I don't care. Get inside now. We're gonna have a good time. He started pulling me toward the house. I resisted as hard as I could. After some struggling, he let go of one arm and reached into his pocket. I assumed for a knife. In that moment, I did something I'm still thankful for. With my free arm, I punched him as hard as I could in the stomach. It stunned him for a few seconds and loosened his grip enough for me to break free. I ran to my car. As I got in, he charged after me, trying to pull me out while holding what was indeed a knife in his other hand. He even yelled, why are you making this so fucking difficult? I grabbed a half-empty soda bottle from the cup holder and threw it. Luckily, it hit him in the head, and he let go. I slammed the door shut. Suddenly, he jumped onto the hood of my car and started scratching and banging on the windshield with the knife. I threw the car into reverse, backed out fast, and reversed down the road while he desperately tried to hold on. He was banging on the hood, screaming, stop the fucking car! I turned onto the next road as sharply as possible, and he finally fell off. I floored the gas to get as far away from that sick bastard as I could. In my panic, I drove a few blocks, making a turn after turn on the side streets, terrified he was following me. Eventually, I reached a red light, slammed on the brakes, and just sat there frozen. I started crying and shaking violently. It hit me how close I'd come to losing my life. I felt like I shouldn't even be alive. When the light turned green, I pulled over and sat on the side of the road, sobbing. Eventually, I gathered enough strength to drive back to the pizzeria. The moment I walked in, My coworker could tell something was horribly wrong. I broke down in front of him, and everyone else rushed to the front to see what was happening. Fighting back tears, I explained everything. My coworker comforted me while my boss, surprisingly, apologized profusely for putting me on night and for what had happened. He took me into the office and handed me the phone to call the police. The officers arrived at the store. I gave my statement, and we took photos of the marks on my arm and the scratches on my car as evidence. My coworker followed me home in his car for safety. I collapsed onto my bed and, strangely, managed to fall asleep. I quit the next day. Luckily, a friend hooked me up with a new job at her clothing store. As for the guy, 2 days later, the police updated me. The duplex was owned by his brother, who lived on one side with his wife. The man lived on the other. He had a long criminal history, starting with robberies and assaults, then escalating to sex crimes. He'd been released from prison about 5 months earlier after serving time for having sex with a minor. When police went to the house, he was already gone, and his family claimed they had no idea where he'd fled. The officers assured me they'd find him. They did, though not alive. For the next 2 months, I lived in constant fear that he'd track me down and finish what he started. Then the police contacted me with an update. He had fled to a nearby city and tried to kidnap a teenager walking home late at night. Fortunately, a witness saw it happen, called the police, and officers caught him in the act of forcing her into his car. He fled again, leading the police on a chase. He ran a red light near a busy boulevard, and a van slammed into the driver's side of his car. Miraculously, the van driver suffered only minor injuries. The man died from his wounds before the ambulance even arrived. I thank the officers for everything and for keeping me informed. As I walked out of the station, I lit a cigarette and took it all in. I don't wish death on people, but hearing about his death brought me relief. He couldn't hurt anyone anymore. I'd never have to face him again or go through the trauma of pressing charges and reliving that night in court. My previous scary experience 2 years earlier had been frightening, but this one takes the cake. I was completely alone, face to face with a psychopath. Who knows where I'd be if he'd managed to drag me inside that house. It's a lot of people's favorite sound. The banging on the front door letting you know that pizza has arrived. There's something about hot delivered pizza that really ties a bow on any evening, especially when it accompanies a movie and a blanket. I jogged over to the door and grabbed the cash off the counter that I already had laid out. I opened the door and couldn't help but be taken aback. The disheveled, skinny pizza delivery man was not the welcoming sight they normally would be. His unkempt hair and obviously dirty clothes gave me an immediate feeling of uneasiness. The acne and sores dotting his pale face and arms resembled the pizza I had previously been so hungry for. I caught myself wearing a distasteful scowl as I stared at the man's pale, oozing face. "Oh," I said, after a few awkward silent moments. Here." I held out my hand with the 2 bills in it. The delivery man didn't immediately react to my offering. He didn't do anything but continue to stare. His gaze was almost one of looking through me. He seemed like he didn't notice me or my outstretched hand. I attempted to wave my hand a bit higher, to pass in front of his lifeless eyes. He still had no reaction. My uneasiness quickly turned to dread. He hadn't moved the entire time. He just kept standing there, staring blankly. He didn't even look like he was breathing. Finally, his eyes darted toward my hand. I couldn't tell whether he was looking at the cash or the wedding ring on my finger. I was glad the ring signified that I had a husband, but his appearance made it easy for me to peg him as an addict of some kind. The foul stench emanating from his body only added to my worry. I waved my hand again and cleared my throat. I was about to slip back into the house without any exchange when he finally began to open the warming bag. I felt slightly less uncomfortable for that moment. As he reached into the bag, he asked in a very quiet voice, "Are you all alone out here?" I tried my best not to seem frightened by his demeanor or his question. I quickly answered, "Oh my gosh, no. I live with my husband." The man had the pizza halfway out of the warming bag when he stopped and immediately followed my response with another question. "Is he here now?" It was at this point that my fear mixed with a slight dose of panic. My thoughts began to race about what might happen next. Why was I in this situation? Was I really about to be raped, maybe killed? "Yes, of course he is here," I said. I felt my face begin to flush. I was a terrible liar under normal circumstances, and I knew what I had just said sounded extremely unconvincing. The dim porch light revealed a slight smirk on the man's face. That odd smile told me he didn't believe me, and that he was fully aware of how terrified I really was. I opened my hand to show that I was trying to give him the money. "Please," I said. I must have sounded so pathetic. It was almost as if I was begging him not to hurt me. He gave a small laugh through his nose and pulled the pizza the rest of the way out of the bag. I grabbed the box and dropped the money to the ground without waiting for him to take it. I slid the box into the house and closed the door, locking it immediately. My heart was pounding and I was breathing heavily. I was really glad to have the door closed between us. I stood there listening for him to walk away. After a minute, it was obvious he hadn't taken a single step. He was still standing in the exact spot. We were both standing a mere 2 feet from each other, separated only by a door. I knew he could tell I hadn't moved either. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard him walk from the front door and down the 2 wooden steps onto the walkway. I sighed in relief. My heart was still pounding, but I had calmed down immensely. I walked over to the living room and set the pizza on the coffee table. I sat back on the couch, no longer hungry at all. I certainly wasn't in the mood to watch a scary movie. I didn't even have a moment to think about what I was going to do when I heard footsteps walking across the deck. Anyone walking across the deck would be able to see directly into the house, right where I was sitting. My anxiety levels began to climb again. 3 loud knocks startled me so much that I let out a small scream. I clutched my chest and yelled, "What? What do you want?" The aggressive manner of the knocking scared the hell out of me. The person outside the door was well aware that I was sitting in the same room. He didn't need to knock that loud. I yelled again in a trembling voice, "What? What do you want?" You forgot your drink, your single drink. He spoke as if his mouth was pressed to the crack of the door. Honey, I yelled in an awful attempt to scare him off. Can you get the door, babe? Again, I was immediately reminded of how bad a liar I was. The acting job wouldn't have convinced anybody. Just leave it on the doorstep, I yelled. My voice cracked as I spoke, and I had begun to cry. Please, just go, I cried out. I was trying to hold my breath and listen to what he was doing. He finally walked off the deck again. I sat there, trying to be as quiet as possible, hoping I would hear him drive away. I hated that he could see me. He could see exactly where I was sitting, and that I was crying. I was trembling and afraid to move. All I could do was wait. So I waited. After almost 5 agonizing minutes, I finally heard his car start. I gasped in relief. I still didn't want to get up and look out the window, though. I didn't want that man looking at me anymore. I just wanted him gone. I could hear the car still in the driveway. It was just sitting there, idling. The man wasn't leaving. The quick sense of relief I'd felt vanished. Once again, I was sitting right back in the grip of fear. I wanted to call the police. There were 2 phones in the house. The closest one was in the kitchen, just to my right. But he would be able to see me if I went in there. He would be able to watch my every move. The other phone was upstairs in our bedroom. I spent the next minute mustering up any sort of courage to get off the couch and run upstairs. It was on the opposite side of the house, and I feared I wouldn't be able to hear the man or his whereabouts. It was when he started revving the engine of his car that I sprang from the couch and ran up the stairs. I ran down the hall and into my bedroom, slammed and locked the door, picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I need help. There's a man here. He won't leave. Are you hurt, ma'am? Is the man hurting you? No, he won't leave. He's sitting in my driveway in his vehicle. Is this your husband or a boyfriend? No, he's a pizza delivery man. There's something wrong with him. A pizza delivery man? What's wrong with him? Is he hurt? Do you need an ambulance? No, listen to me. This guy, he's strange. There's something wrong with him. He won't leave me alone. Has this man threatened you? No, he's just creepy. He's asking me strange questions and he won't leave. I would like you to send an officer, please. Okay, ma'am, we are dispatching an officer to your location. I'm showing 2355 Walker Road. Yes, that's it. Please, hurry. The operator started to say something, but my attention was stolen when I heard something. It sounded as if there was someone in my house. I froze and was too scared to even speak into the receiver. I placed my thumb over the phone speaker so I could listen more intently. I held my breath and tried to pinpoint any disturbance in the silence. After a few minutes of hearing nothing, I checked the phone and found that the 911 operator had hung up. I slowly and quietly hung up the phone and walked toward the edge of my room to listen through the door. Nothing. Still nothing. I opened the door and listened down the hallway. Still nothing. I walked across the hall into the adjacent room looked out the window into the driveway, and was relieved to see that the headlights were gone. I let out another long breath of relief, although a lot of my anxiety had been slightly lifted. I was still on edge and wary of the whole situation. I was glad to know the police officer was on the way. I walked back down the stairs into the living room. The smell of pizza had overtaken the room and reminded me of my original plan. Normally, it would have been a pleasant smell, but it only reminded me of that disgusting man and his bloody, blotchy skin. I sat back on the couch and decided to wait for the police officer to arrive. Not a few seconds had passed when I heard the door handle trying to turn. I hadn't heard anybody walking on the deck, and I certainly hadn't heard any cars pull into the driveway. I jumped up, my heart pounding again. I slowly walked over to the wall and flicked off the lights. Now that the interior lights were off, I could see out into the front. To my horror, I could see that the man's car was still parked in the driveway. I had mistaken his headlights being off for the car not being there. 3 bone-shaken knuckles sounded, making me yell, "Who is it? What do you want?" 3 more aggressive knocks echoed throughout the house. My heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. The man began to knock on the door in a steady beat, seeming to get louder with each hit. When it sounded like the door was about to come off the hinges, I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Go away!" The man stopped beating on the door, and it was silent. All I could hear was my heavy breathing. I could feel my heart beating throughout my entire body. "Open the door," the man said. The menacing tone he used brought me back to tears. "No, please go away. The police are on their way," I cried out in the darkness. "The police?" He paused for a while. "It's probably going to take them a long time to get here, don't you think?" "I think it's just going to be you and me." He said it with a laugh. "They said there was an officer close by. He'll be here any second." I had begun to sound almost hysterical. I knew the man on the other side of the door could hear the fear in my voice. "Just open the fucking door." "No, go away," I cried. The tears poured down my face as I begged the man to leave. "Okay, then fine," he said. "I will leave you alone for now. Enjoy your pizza, Christine." Hearing the deranged man use my name made my stomach turn. I heard him slowly walk from the deck, put the lights off. I could see the man's silhouette pass by the window. I watched him move down the walkway and slowly get into his car. I heard his car start, and I walked into the kitchen to make sure he was leaving. I watched the car's headlights back down the driveway and then onto the main road. The car sat on the road for a whole minute. I watched and prayed for him to leave. Eventually, the car started to move, and he drove down the road and out of my sight. Again, I let out a large sigh of relief. I couldn't believe how afraid I had just been. The entire ordeal had seemed like a terrible dream. Knowing that the officer was on the way was very comforting. I don't think I would have felt comfortable at all if that wasn't the case. Seeing a friendly face, a protector, a person of authority, would do me good. I sat there in the darkness for a long time. It seemed like it was taking the police officer forever to arrive. I had a lot of time to think. The fear I had experienced over the last 20 minutes had begun to morph into anger. I was angry at that creep. He had completely unsettled me and ruined my evening. Was I now fearful of being in my own house? Why did he have to say something like that? I decided to call the pizza place and complain about him. I grabbed the phone off the kitchen wall and called the number. "Can I speak to a manager, please?" I asked. After a few seconds, the manager picked up and I began. "Hi, my name is Christine Barbson. I had ordered pizza from you guys about an hour ago." The manager cut me off and asked, "Do you live down Walker, ma'am?" "Yes, Walker Road." "Ma'am, I am terribly sorry. I just received a call from another customer in your area. They haven't received their pizza yet either. Something may have happened to our driver. We'd be happy to send out another one as soon as possible." "No, I did receive my pizza. He arrived 20 minutes ago, and he threatened me." "Oh, that's strange. Can you tell me what happened?" "He's a fucking creep. He was awful. He was trying to scare me. Who the hell do you have working for you? Who the hell is this creep?" "He? Uh, I'm confused." "Yes, the delivery man that you sent here." "Ma'am, the driver who went out to your area was Tiffany. Short, blonde, and female." It felt like a dagger had pierced me right in the heart. The adrenaline that pumped through my veins almost blinded me. The manager was still speaking on the other end of the phone, but I couldn't hear a single word. The amount of thoughts racing through my head had begun to make me dizzy. I felt like fainting. I felt like throwing up. I heard a car pull into the driveway. For a moment, I feared it was the driver again, but as the car pulled closer, I could see that it was a police car. I cut off the manager on the other end of the phone. I I don't know what's going on. The police are here now." I hung up the phone and went out the front door to meet the cop in the driveway. I ran to the car just as the officer was getting out. "Oh, thank God you're here. I just called the pizza place and there's something wrong." The officer closed his door and walked around to meet me at the front end of his cruiser. I was so relieved that I ran into his arms and began to cry. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you. The pizza guy." As I hugged my savior, I noticed the same foul stench that I had smelled earlier. His ill-fitting uniform was far too large for his skinny body. I backed off his chest and noticed the sores covering his arms, which had begun to tighten around me. I delivered pizzas and was sent to what was almost definitely a robbery setup, maybe even something worse. I work at a pizza place and usually stay inside because my insurance doesn't cover claims when I'm driving for business. Occasionally, though, I'll cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers because the money is good. Our delivery area includes a few new upper middle class cookie cutter neighborhoods, bad tips, an older 1940s era village, average tips, two apartment complexes, great tips, some trailer parks, great tips or no tips at all, and a bunch of rural areas, usually good tips. Not rural enough to see hundreds of stars at night, but far enough out that you couldn't hear your neighbors yelling. About a week ago, I was covering a delivery shift. I came back to the shop feeling pretty good. I was averaging $5 per delivery, and they had all been close by. I checked to see if I had any more runs. There was one to an address I had never seen before. We mostly get semi regular customers, so an unfamiliar address always stands out. This one was way out on one of the more rural roads. I asked the kid who took the order what was up because there were special instructions on the ticket. He said, "They told me to go around back because the front door isn't operational." I thought, okay, that's not that uncommon. People often want you to go around back. Maybe they just painted the front door, the house shifted, and it's a pain to open, or they're just hanging out in the backyard. As I drove out to the house, I started getting an odd feeling. I really didn't like the idea of going behind some house way out in the sticks. It would be far too easy for someone to order a pizza to an abandoned property. There are quite a few in the rural areas. Then jump the delivery driver. I decided I'd scope the place out when I got there. If it seemed sketchy, I'd just call them and make up something about how company policy prohibits going around the back of houses to prevent robberies. The closer I got, the more bizarre I realized the road became less populated the farther down it went. Great. I was nearly at the address and driving slowly when I saw a house that looked completely abandoned. It was set back from the road, hidden by trees, with no visible address. I thought, that house better not be it. I drove past and checked the next house's address. Sure enough, the abandoned looking one was the right one. Shit. At that point, I wasn't super worried yet. Out in the boonies, standards of home upkeep are pretty low, so a house in disrepair isn't unusual. I doubled back, pulled into the driveway, and immediately got bad vibes. It just didn't feel right. I parked my car at the very end of the driveway, with the rear half on the shoulder, so anyone passing by could clearly see it. Then I called the shop and told them I was at a very sketchy house. I said, if I don't call back in 4 or 5 minutes, call me. If I don't answer, call the cops. While I was on the phone, I took a good look at the house. It wasn't just in disrepair, it looked extremely abandoned. The driveway was crumbling, partly gravel, with weeds growing through it. There was no mailbox, no trash cans, no car, no lawnmower, no landscaping, no kids' toys. Absolutely nothing in the yard. The grass hadn't been mowed in what looked like years. The house itself was falling apart. The roof was collapsing. The siding was peeling, and the back deck, which wrapped around the side, was rotting. The only part that looked remotely decent was the allegedly non functioning front door. All the windows were shut. It was 95 degrees and humid, and this place clearly had no air conditioning. Blinds or curtains were closed on every one. The few without coverings were boarded up. I didn't even see utility wires running to the house. It wasn't fully dark yet, just dusk, but there wasn't a single light on inside. Now I was getting pretty nervous. I'm a 5'10", 180-pound guy. Not in great shape, but I took karate for 10 years, so I'm not helpless. Still, I avoid confrontation whenever possible. I'm mostly a pacifist. I wasn't too worried about getting robbed. It's not my money and the shop covers it, but I was worried about getting jumped, stabbed, or worse. Our area is fairly safe overall, but lately there's been an influx of unsavory people moving in from the city. We've had a spike in home invasions, robberies, and, more concerning, a few stabbings and assaults. It was time to either nut up or shut up. I wasn't about to charge in like an idiot, so I got out my phone and called the number they provided while grabbing the pizza. I also left my car door open. A running car half in the road at an abandoned house with the door open looked suspicious, right? I figured if things went south, it might look out of place, just enough to make someone stop, though there's barely any traffic that far down that road. I started walking toward the house while the phone rang. It rang twice, then an automated message came on, something like, "This number is associated with an internet texting app." I think it was Haywire or one of those free services that let you text from different number over data. We've had prank orders using those numbers before. That was a huge red flag. My heart was pounding in my throat, and every instinct was screaming at me to bail. I didn't want to get a reputation for being flaky and lose future delivery shifts, which is the only reason I hadn't left yet. So there I stood, holding a pizza, staring at this house, refusing to go around back. I was hoping whoever was inside would look out, see me, and come to the road to get their food. I kept watching the front windows for any sign of life. Then, a blind lifted on the window next to the front door. A really creepy looking guy, with a hat pulled low and big sunglasses on, was staring out. Remember, he was inside a pitch black house, surrounded by trees at dusk. There was zero reason for sunglasses. Behind him, I could make out what looked like a much bigger guy standing in the room, though it was hard to tell for sure. When he saw me, he mouthed something, then darted away, presumably toward the broken front door. That was it. I noped the fuck out. I had stayed close to my car, so it was only a few steps. I jumped in, tossed the pizza onto the passenger seat, something I'd never do because I'm anal about keeping my car clean, slammed it into reverse, and ground the gears a little because I didn't wait for the clutch to fully engage. I locked my door, floored it backward onto the main road, slipped the clutch horribly, and didn't even check for cross traffic. Yeah, I know, really stupid. I started driving away and glanced back. The screen door on the front was now open, but the inner door was still shut. The guy wasn't outside yelling, "Wait, come back," or anything. He was just gone. I pulled over a little ways up the road, called the shop, and told them I was okay. I said I'd explain when I got back. The people never called to complain about their missing pizza. Most customers call even if it's 15 minutes late. The fact that they didn't confirm they were up to no good. After I told my coworkers the story, we all agreed it was definitely a robbery setup at minimum. We added the address and phone number to our no delivery list and ate their pizza. I doubt I would have actually been murdered, but robbed at gunpoint or roughed up? Yeah, very possible. It was still extremely unnerving to realize how easily I could have walked into serious trouble just by doing my job, especially if they picked a slightly less obviously abandoned house. Sorry for writing such a long story about a relatively minor incident, but I like to write even if I'm not great at it. To anyone who delivers pizza, be wary of situations like this. I looked it up afterward, and apparently, This is a pretty common way to rob delivery drivers. I'm just glad we never actually met. I drove packages through one of the most exclusive enclaves in California's valleys, where sprawling estates clung to rugged canyons and sheer drop offs. The roads twisted narrowly, and every driveway felt like a near vertical climb. New to the gig, I actually loved the routine, cruising on company time, taking in jaw dropping scenery, admiring wild architecture, and crossing paths with all sorts of interesting residents. This was back before the pandemic tightened everything up. Deliveries felt more casual, less watched. One afternoon, I drew a hefty batch of orders for that upscale maze. The layout slowed me to a crawl. Addresses hid behind overgrown foliage, ornate gates, or confusing numbering. Packages got mixed up. I backtracked more than once, and without any fancy GPS unit. This was years earlier. I relied on instinct and patience. I stayed calm, tackling it step by step, one road, one delivery, one breathtaking view at a time. The vistas and tunes on the radio made it easy to tune out and enjoy. As evening crept in, my cargo lightened considerably, but the clock showed I'd slipped into overtime. Normally, I'd radio a supervisor, but I was already well past the mark with just a handful of stops remaining. I figured I'd power through and wrap it up. To save time, I pushed the pace a bit, pulling right up to front doors instead of parking at the curb and trekking the long paths. The next address pulled me deeper into the quieter, shadower fringe of the neighborhood. Only a scattering of homes set out there, most dark, and the ones with lights belonged to absolute monsters of real estate. Multi-million-dollar spreads with elaborate landscaping and infinity pools that seemed to spill toward the abyss. I eased past an open gate, followed the winding ascent, and arrived at the final drop. The place was breathtaking, a towering, modern, Romanesque mansion, perched right off the cliff edge, flanked by a huge garage with an apartment above, connected by a sweeping terrace. My immediate thought, what on earth does someone who lives here even need delivered? The box was medium sized and weighed a decent amount, but I minded my own business, no shaking, no snooping. Since it was late and the house set so remotely, I simply set it by the door without ringing. Better not to interrupt whatever elite dinner or celebrity downtime might be happening inside. As I headed back to the van, one of the garage doors rumbled open. Bright light flooded the driveway. A set of headlights appeared, climbing the slope, then slowed and swung in, blocking the exit at an angle. Odd, but I figured maybe they had private security patrolling. After all, I passed through a gate. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a tall, solidly built man, hands casually in his pockets. He eyed my clearly marked company van, relaxed, visibly, and gave a small nod. I greeted him, explained I'd been running behind all day and just finished the drop. He said no problem. He hadn't recognized the vehicle at first. Then he mentioned recent trespasser problems, people showing up uninvited over the past several months. I remarked how surprising that was, given the isolation way out on these cliffs. He agreed it was nuts, but so were the intruders. I chuckled lightly. He didn't. Instead, he fixed me with this flat, unsettling stare, like I might be one of them. I wished him good night and started toward the van. He called out, "Didn't I need a signature for that?" I said no, not required for this one. He pressed, convinced I was wrong, staring hard with those shadowed, almost lifeless eyes. Despite his polished appearance and expensive ride, a sleek, blacked out SUV tricked out with lifts and off road mods, something felt deeply off. Maybe drugs, maybe worse. I asked if he could shift his vehicle so I could leave. He corrected me. "It's more of a truck, actually." Then offered to show me the upgrades. I passed. Now he was inching closer with each sentence, tiny steps that closed the gap until he was uncomfortably near. He circled the van, commenting on its suspension. Good. The paint. Cheap. The fuel it preferred. Then casually mentioned how simple it would be to slice the brake lines. My pulse kicked up. I grabbed a quick proof of delivery slip from the van, scribbled it out just to escape. While I wrote, he kept orbiting, muttering more vehicle trivia. I handed him the sticker. He studied it, nodded, but didn't sign. Asked if I knew why he wanted it. I said no. He locked eyes and explained, "Just in case anything bad happens to you, I can prove it didn't happen here. It's got the time you left and everything." He gestured toward a camera mounted on the garage corner without looking at it. His signature would sync with the security footage, establishing when I departed. I forced a smile, thanked him for the concern. He laughed. "It's not for you. It's for me. So, if you drive off, get attacked, raped, murdered, and tossed off the cliff, I'm not part of any investigation. Clean alibi." His exact words. He stepped even closer. I retreated into the driver's seat, but couldn't shut the door with him right there. Panic must have shown on my face. He paused, chuckled, patted my shoulder. "Relax. A job's not worth all that stress." Then he backed off, closed my door for me, tapped the window, and waved. I fired up the engine while he finally moved his truck into the garage. One last glance back. He stood silhouetted in the bright opening, hand still pocketed. When our eyes met, he pointed up at the camera, then tapped his watch. I tore down that hill faster than I ever had before. No clue if he was high, deranged, playing some sick mind game with the delivery girl, or all three. But after that night, I stopped being so chatty and trusting with the people whose doors I knocked on. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true creepy delivery stories. I'd like to take a moment and address the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continued dedication. I know I sound like a broken record, but I really do appreciate you. Without you, I wouldn't have my voice, and Back to Ashes wouldn't exist. So even though I sound like a broken record, it comes from the heart. So thank you. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these collections. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.